Very sensitive person stops showing strong emotion. The need to pull away starts to fade. The one who always felt things intensely, until one day you just couldn't feel anything at all. And suddenly, the person who never seemed to care much starts to. That's not just luck, that's emotional forces shifting. The very sensitive person emotionally pulls back. It's not to be mean, it's because they are worn out, spent so much time being the emotional connection. The one who notices stress before anyone talks about it, the one who offers comfort to someone who pushes it away. But a time arrives, a quiet, important time when they stop trying to force closeness and start trying to protect their calm. And in that stillness, a strange thing occurs. The person who avoids closeness, the one who built barriers, who needed room, who always seemed out of reach, to feel the very thing they tried to escape. Why? Because the energy changes. The sensitive person steps back not to punish, save themselves, and suddenly the avoidance tactic doesn't work anymore. The unintended game is over. They begin to soften, because someone talked them into it, but because for the first time they realize what absence truly costs. That being close isn't a danger. It's the one thing that kept them secure all along. And here's the change. Sensitive person stops feeling strongly. It's not a farewell. It's a fresh start, a taking back of their energy, of self-respect, of balance. And when the need to pull away begins to lessen, that's not tricking anyone. That's life finding stability again, finally standing equally. No chasing, no running, just honesty. Because real love doesn't beg, it levels things out. The sensitive person's inner emotional world is deep, wide, and always focused on others. They feel things others can't say. They guess needs before they are mentioned. They comfort, soothe, and carry emotional burdens that often aren't theirs. For a long time, this feels like love, to care so deeply, to help heal, to understand. But over time it begins to wear them out, because empathy, when it has no limits, becomes a kind of leaving yourself behind. It's a good trait that, without boundaries, slowly drains a person's emotional supply. The sensitive person usually doesn't see this happening. They think, if I just love harder, they'll open up. They see emotional distance as a test to prove the strength of their care. They believe patience will break down walls, that kindness will eventually be returned. But what they don't notice is that this over-giving is not being matched. Avoidant person who often fears closeness or showing weakness accepts this love, but can't handle it. To them, closeness feels overwhelming and distance feels safe. So while the sensitive person moves closer, the avoidant person naturally steps back. Sensitive person, trying to close the gap, reaches even further. This stretching continues emotionally, mentally, until one day something changes. The sensitive person reaches a point where the giving no longer feels right. Urge to care starts to feel heavy. The body tightens up where it used to be relaxed. The smile feels forced. The words of comfort feel empty, as if something inside them quietly says enough. But this isn't anger. It's running on empty. It's the body's safety switch saying you've done too much. When the sensitive person reaches this breaking point, they don't shout. They don't argue. Step away. The emotional shutdown begins slowly, like ice forming on water. Calm, quiet, total. What used to cause strong feelings now barely registers. The tears that once flowed easily don't come at all. They stop studying, stop fixing, stop trying to figure out why the other person won't join them where they are. They begin to see that empathy, without equal effort, is not connection. It's erasing yourself. The moment the sensitive person emotionally freezes, it's not because they've stopped caring, because they've started seeing things clearly. They realize love can't work when one person carries both hearts. Realize that the constant emotional effort was not a sign of love, but of unevenness. The freeze is not punishment, it's protection. It's the body and mind taking back calm after years of too much stress and effort. And in that quiet stepping back, change happens inside the sensitive person. They begin to turn that same kindness inward. once used to figure out someone else's silence, is now used to listen to their own needs. The time once spent waiting for feelings to be returned becomes space for getting back in touch with themselves. For perhaps the first time in a long time, they stop acting as an emotional helper and start breathing easily. The breaking point is not ruin, it's becoming something new. The sensitive person who once gave without end finally learns that love is not measured by how much pain they can handle, how well they can respect themselves while loving another. Silence for the sensitive person isn't easy. They're used to filling the gaps between people with understanding, comfort, and soothing words. They reach out when someone pulls away, when things feel tense. They use words and emotional warmth to bridge any distance that threatens closeness. But a time comes when even their voice starts to feel like noise, when every try to connect feels like shouting into nothing. That's when silence starts to speak its truth. It's not about getting back at someone or not caring. It's about finding shelter in stillness after too much emotional mess. The sensitive person's silence often happens after countless attempts to talk have been ignored or brushed off. They've tried to explain how they feel, to say what they need, to close the emotional distance with patience and gentleness. But when nothing changes, to understand that talking won't fix what the other person refuses to look at. They stop repeating themselves. They stop trying to get clarity. Silence becomes the only language that feels true. It's not a trick, it's a turning point. It says, I've said everything I can, I need to hear myself again. To the avoidant person, this silence feels odd and disturbing. Used to the sensitive person's never-ending understanding, to having someone who always started fixing things. But when that voice goes quiet, sense of control, the power dynamic shifts. The space that once protected them now feels empty. The absence of the sensitive person's emotional presence shows what words never could, how much the connection depended on one person's effort. For the sensitive person, silence becomes strength because it takes back energy that was being poured into a one-sided connection. It's the first clear limit that doesn't need to be explained or excused. In silence, they stop doing too much emotionally. They stop managing another person's discomfort. They stop trying to prove their value through patience or understanding. There's calm in this stillness, the kind of calm that comes from realizing that protecting your energy is not being cold. It's self-respect. Silence also changes what's happening inside. The sensitive person is always talking, comforting, explaining. They are often disconnected from their own needs. They become so focused on keeping things peaceful that they forget to notice their own tiredness, their own loneliness, their own unfulfilled wishes. Come silent, the noise of too much thinking begins to fade. They can finally hear their gut feeling again. That quiet voice that says, "You've done enough. You deserve more," than always reaching out. This silence can feel strange at first. The sensitive person might worry they're being mean, that they're leaving someone who still needs understanding. But with time, to see that silence is an absence. It's space to breathe, to restart, to remember that closeness should never be held up by one person alone. In this space, their nervous system starts to relax, to fix everything begins to ease. The strong urge to seek emotional comfort from outside turns into self-trust. Begin to see how much energy was being spent trying to be heard by someone who wasn't listening. And the silence says a lot, shows boundaries more effectively than any explanation could. It says, "My peace matters." It shows that the sensitive person is no longer available for emotional imbalance. This quiet confidence often sets off something in the avoidant person, a subtle wake up. The absence that once felt comfortable now feels uncomfortable. The silence they used to value as safety now feels like loss. The sensitive person doesn't cause this shift on purpose. They're not trying to make anyone miss them or regret their distance. The silence is for them, a break from emotional over-giving, a reset from constant effort. It's the moment they stop playing the role of the healer and start becoming whole again. What was once about managing another's emotions becomes about managing their own peace. In silence, the sensitive person learns the difference between cutting off and stepping back. Cutting off is cold and reactive. Stepping back is calm and centered. One comes from pain, the other from strength. The sensitive person's silence is the latter, a quiet, honorable statement that love without balance cannot last. It's not stopping care, but a change in focus from outside approval to inner stability. The most important thing about this silence is that it restores equilibrium. The sensitive person no longer carries the burden of keeping the relationship emotionally alive. The avoidant person, if they are ready to feel what they've been avoiding, the dynamic evens out not through fighting, but through stillness. In that stillness, the sensitive person takes back the strength that comes from not needing to be understood to know their value. When the sensitive person finally steps away, the entire emotional landscape of the relationship changes. It's as though the air itself is different. Once felt predictable, now feels uncertain. For so long, the sensitive person's energy acted as the emotional power that kept the connection going. They were the ones checking in, understanding the unspoken, keeping talks from ending in silence. Constant emotional presence created a sense of security, even if that security was one-sided. When that energy suddenly disappears, it's not just absence, it's chaos. The dynamic that once centered on the sensitive person's giving begins to fall apart. Avoidant person feels that change in a way they can't easily put into words. The sensitive person stepping back changes the rhythm of how they interact. The avoidant person, who was used to having space and distance on their own terms, now faces an unexpected hole. They begin to feel the silence they once wanted. What was once a comfort, emotional distance, becomes a mirror. For the first time, they sense the price of their avoidance. Sensitive person's absence immediately causes panic. It's more subtle. It brings a new awareness, unease, that starts to grow over time. The energy that used to flow one way, from the sensitive person to the avoidant, now turns around, is not invisible, it's felt. When the sensitive person stops over giving, stops comforting, and stops guessing needs, it shows the imbalance. Avoidant person no longer has someone filling the emotional gaps for them. Without realizing it, begin to experience what the sensitive person has always felt: doubt, longing, confusion. The power dynamic becomes equal not through confrontation, through the natural result of stillness. The sensitive person's energy, once a steady source of emotional warmth, is now turned inward. Withdrawal becomes a quiet teacher. The avoidant person begins to notice things they had previously ignored. The absence of the sensitive person's reassurance makes them question their own actions. Of emotional pursuit forces them to face their own discomfort with closeness. They start to feel the effects of their own distance. And while this realization may not lead to immediate openness, it begins to soften the emotional distance that has defined them. What once felt like safety in separation now feels like being alone. For the sensitive person, this shift is not about control. It's about balance. Back their energy, they allow natural responsibility to take hold. The relationship dynamic becomes more honest. The sensitive person is no longer doing emotional work that hides the avoidant person's resistance. The avoidant person, stripped of the comfort of being constantly understood, must now face their own habits. It's in this space that growth begins. Because the sensitive person demanded it, but because the energy that supported avoidance has finally been taken away. The shift in energy shows the truth. The sensitive person realizes how powerful stillness can be. Avoidant person learns that distance doesn't prevent pain, it only delays it. In that mutual unease, the emotional dynamic resets, giving both people a chance to see what connection feels like when it's not built on one person's effort alone. When the sensitive person steps back, avoidant person begins to experience something new. A kind of emotional silence that feels different from the space they once sought for security. At first, they may not even recognize it as loss. They might tell themselves they simply need time to think, or that they value their freedom. But over time, the absence starts to ring. The warmth that used to welcome them is gone. The understanding that once made their guardedness bearable no longer softens their distance. What used to feel like peace now feels like emptiness. Avoidant person, that's the start of realization. Avoidant people often spend their lives avoiding showing weakness, because at some point they learned that closeness leads to pain, control, rejected. Emotional distance became a shield, a way to survive rather than a choice to hurt others. When they met the sensitive person, they found someone who made connection feel less dangerous, someone who seemed safe enough to be near yet strong enough to handle their distance. The sensitive person's presence made avoidance easier to keep up, because the sensitive person kept reaching, kept understanding, kept making the relationship work despite the imbalance. But when that stops, when the sensitive person emotionally pulls back and stops reaching, person loses their support system. The dynamic they relied on for emotional control collapses. The silence feels different now because it's not chosen, it's a result. The sensitive person's absence exposes the emptiness that avoidance hides. The avoidant person begins to feel a strange pull, not just toward the person, but toward the parts of themselves they've been separate from. For the first time, they can feel what their emotional distance costs them. Absence has a way of showing the truth clearly. When someone's presence was always taken for granted, their withdrawal becomes a mirror. Avoidant person starts to notice the small things they once ignored. The way the sensitive person's laughter used to fill the room, the gentleness of their voice when there was conflict, the way they offered comfort without being asked. These moments begin to appear not as good memories, but as realization. The avoidant person begins to sense the depth of what they've lost. A person who waited on them, but a person who truly saw them. They ran from. True emotional connection now becomes the thing they desire. This softening isn't dramatic or sudden, begins quietly with unease. The avoidant person might think about reaching out, but hesitate, unsure of what to say or how to reconnect, go over moments in their mind, wondering how they seem to someone who gave so much and expected so little back. There's often guilt mixed into this awareness, a recognition of the imbalance of the times they pulled away when they should have leaned in. That guilt, while uncomfortable, is also humanizing. It breaks through the protective armor that has long defined them. Avoidance softening is not about becoming dependent or suddenly good at emotions. It's about realizing that avoidance doesn't stop pain, simply puts it off. The loneliness they feel in the sensitive person's absence isn't punishment. It's exposure. The defenses that once seemed needed now feel heavy. They begin to see that the sensitive person's emotional reach was never manipulation. It was love, realization. Something within them begins to soften. The sensitive person's silence, once dismissed as not caring, starts to feel sacred. Boundaries, strength, and self-worth, qualities the avoidant person may not have understood before, but now deeply respects. Sit with the discomfort of absence. They begin to face emotions they've avoided for years: fear, regret, longing, tenderness. This facing of feelings is what begins to melt the ice around their heart. What happens next depends on their willingness to face themselves. Some will fight it, going back into old habits of avoidance, but others, the ones ready for growth, will let the silence teach them. They'll realize that love isn't meant to be controlled or limited. It's meant to be met, returned, and cared for. The absence of the sensitive person becomes the lesson that presence once couldn't give. It wakes up empathy in the avoidant person, not only for the person they've pulled away from, but for themselves, for the lonely part who learned to fear closeness. In that awakening, to understand connection differently, not as a loss of control, but as a shared experience of security, not as a danger, as a way back to themselves. The sensitive person's absence doesn't just make them miss someone, it makes them feel again. And that feeling, fragile and new, is where healing quietly starts. When two people join together, one often gives more and one often holds back. The sensitive person gives freely. Affection, reassurance, understanding, believing that love means carrying the emotional weight of both. The avoidant person, meanwhile, takes cautiously, unsure of how to accept that much closeness without feeling too much. For a time, this unevenness can look functional because it feels like agreement. One leads with feeling, the other with holding back. But true connection cannot grow this way. When one person is always reaching out and the other is always retreating, comes a rescue mission instead of a partnership, and rescue, no matter how kind, is still control disguised as care. The sensitive person often believes they are helping, that their consistency and warmth will eventually teach the avoidant person to open up. They see their emotional strength as a bridge, something that can carry both people to safety. But in trying to heal the other, love requires equality, not endurance. Carrying the weight of the relationship may keep it from breaking. It also prevents it from growing. Avoidant person never learns to meet the sensitive person halfway, because the sensitive person never stops walking toward them, keeps repeating itself. One gives to feel worthy, the other pulls back to feel safe. Balance begins the moment both people take responsibility for their emotional parts. For the sensitive person, that means realizing that love doesn't require constant sacrifice. Real care involves boundaries, the ability to give without running out of energy, to love without losing oneself. It's not the sensitive person's job to manage another person's comfort with closeness. Their responsibility is to respect their own needs and to say them without fear that doing so will drive the other away. When they finally stop rescuing, they stop allowing avoidance. They create the space for the avoidant person to rise to the level of connection rather than being carried there. For the avoidant person, balance means learning that showing weakness is not weakness, and that closeness does not erase independence. People often see emotional intimacy as losing control, but what they discover in balanced love is that openness increases freedom rather than threatening it. When they begin to share their inner world, small ways, they allow the relationship to breathe. They no longer rely on distance as safety. Instead, to feel secure in being truly seen. The moment they meet the sensitive person with effort, instead of avoidance, the entire mood of the relationship changes. True connection is not built through chasing and retreating. It's built through giving and taking equally. Each person showing up completely while respecting their own limits and the others. Love stops being about one person healing the other and becomes about two people healing together. Balance turns love from a survival habit into a shared experience. It's no longer about holding someone or being held. Walking together, equally grounded, equally responsible, equally free. Very sensitive person pulls back, and the avoidance starts to fade. What we're really seeing isn't the end of love. It's the start of truth. It's the moment when emotional roles that were once fixed begin to change. The sensitive person learns that love without boundaries is not love. Self-sacrifice. The avoidant person learns that distance doesn't protect them, it isolates them. In this turning point, both are given a rare chance to see what connection looks like when it's no longer driven by fear, performance, or imbalance, but by awareness. The sensitive person, through their silence and stillness, finds that peace is not found in fixing others, but in honoring themselves. Kindness is strongest when it's not dependent on someone else's healing. The avoidant person, through their discomfort and longing, that showing weakness isn't the enemy. It's the path back to real closeness. And in that moment, one learns to let go and the other learns to reach out. Something beautiful happens. The energy that once felt like stress begins to blend. Love starts to feel less like a chase and more like a dance. Two people moving toward each other, not out of need, but out of choice. This dynamic, as complicated as it may be, isn't about winners or losers. It's about change. Sometimes the emotional pull back isn't a wall, it's a doorway. Sometimes the softening isn't weakness, it's waking up. Every relationship that tests us deeply is teaching us something important about how we love, protect ourselves, and how we let others meet us. So, if you've ever been the sensitive person who gave too much or the avoidant person who ran too far, remember, awareness is the first step toward balance. Healing doesn't come from chasing or hiding. It comes from meeting in the middle. It comes from courage, patience, the willingness to see yourself honestly. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for accepting this truth. Whether you're the one who pulled back, the one who softened, or the one still learning how to find balance between the two, may you leave tonight remembered that love in its healthiest form is never about losing yourself to reach another. It's about learning to stand fully as yourself, so that when you do meet someone halfway, it's not out of fear or need, but out of being whole. Thank you for your time, your presence, and your open heart. Take care of your energy, respect your boundaries, choosing love that feels like peace, not survival. Thank you and good night.